A story then. Right, well, listen close, and I shall tell you a story. A long while ago, I recall seeing a young man and another young man pass through here. They were walking hand in hand for quite a long time and traipsing through the grass with what I think, it was difficult to say whether their urgency was of abandonment or whether it was of fear. It's difficult to say. As they walked through, I recall seeing them make a marking upon a tree in a little heart shape, 2 letters engraved with a little plus in the center. I understand that this is something that human youth do quite often. I think ordinarily I would have had half a mind to walk up and interrupt them, ask them to stop making their markings upon the tree. But then, who am I to interrupt the love of 2 young people? I think there's something truly... The forest feels as though it is meant to preserve those feelings, and so I let them be. And they kept walking. They walked for a little while longer, until they came across a clearing. Within the clearing, there were a set of animals. There was a bear, there was a deer, and there was a squirrel, I believe. Some of the creatures in this forest tend not to obey the laws of the rest of the world, and these 2 found this out quite quickly. They approached the bear first. And the bear, well, the bear is one that we don't tend to talk about too often. I'm wondering what the right word to describe the bear is. Hyperactive, I suppose. He runs from place to place, he darts from tree to tree. Some say that he is more dangerous than he knows. But of course, the young couple came up and they tried to speak with the bear. The bear didn't want to stop, and he kept darting from tree to tree. The clearing sort of resembled a circle, and the bear ran from tree to tree, up, down, left and right, and the couple tried to flag him down to speak. But he wouldn't stop. And so, after a while, one of the 2 became quite agitated. They began screaming and shouting at the bear, "Won't you stop? Won't you slow down?" But the bear simply didn't. He ran and ran with a big smile on his face, his tongue falling about his jaws. And so, the bear never responded. Perhaps he was chasing a fly. Perhaps he was playing a game with someone in his head. But either way, the couple could do nothing to distract the bear. Next, of course, there was the deer, who too was wandering about the clearing. The couple attended to speak to them as well. They wandered after him, and the deer looked back at them. They asked, "What is this place? Which way is back to our city? Do you know?" And the deer just looked at them. It ruffled its ears, blinked slowly with those oily black eyes, and then it turned around and it wandered off into the forest. Now the other of the 2, the smaller of the 2, he ran off and tried to grab the deer again and ask, "How dare you turn away from me? Tell me which way to go." But the deer kept wandering off into the forest. And so, the 2 reunited and decided, well, perhaps the deer doesn't know. And so, after that, the one remaining animal they could speak with was the squirrel. They went to ask the squirrel a question. And the squirrel was remarkably calm. It sat dead center of the clearing, holding a little acorn, nibbling away every once in a while, but never with too much haste. The squirrel might not have been hungry. Perhaps he just enjoyed the taste of the acorn and wanted to savor it over a long time. His forest is rich in natural resources and food for all its creatures, and so the squirrel sat and slowly and surely made his way through the acorn. The couple went up and asked, "Which way is it to get back home? We miss our families. We got out here to have a walk together and we got lost." But the squirrel looked up with no fear, did not run back into the trees. He looked up and he smiled, and then he returned to his acorn. The couple were furious, and they looked down at the squirrel, and one of them, the taller of the two, he made a start, and he tried getting the attention of the squirrel. He said, "Hey! How dare you turn your back on us? Tell me which way to go." But the squirrel, with no fear in its eyes, looked up, smiled, and went back to his acorn. Now, after this, the two were ensconced. These two felt a tremendous sense of fear and panic. However shall we get out of this forest now? It's so long and winding, and no one seems to want to tell us how to get home. And they walked, and they walked, and they walked until their feet could walk no more, and when their feet could walk no more, they slept. And after they'd slept, they stood up and walked some more. The story doesn't have much of an ending per se, but essentially, I watched them. Every day they woke up, went to sleep, woke up and went to sleep again. They were never attacked by a creature, and they were never short of food. Eventually, as they walked, they found trees, they found food, they found other animals who, like the bear, deer, and squirrel, simply let them be. They never spoke. They never roared or cried or attacked them for food. They simply let them be. And after a week or so, the couple just found their way out on their own. They walked, and walked some more, and then eventually, they found their way free. Like the squirrel, who slowly tended to his acorn, the bear, who ran around the clearing with no clear objective in mind, and the deer, who slowly made his way back into the forest, the two found that as long as there is no danger, and as long as no one shows you strife, there is truly no need to rush. And I watched as they wandered the forests. I watched as each passing day they became more and more happy. For the first couple of days they didn't speak much to one another. They walked and walked and walked, and before long they began to argue and bicker and slept on opposite sides of a clearing. But then, after a while, they woke up and began to talk to one another again. When they found food, they shared it. When they met animals, instead of begging them for directions, they pet them on the heads and went their merry way. And in the end, now I don't know the pair of them, but I do have quite a keen eye for connection, I suppose. And I dare say that those two might have been just a little more in love when they left than when they entered. I suppose what this story means to me is that life is rife with opportunities for growth. And if you remain too narrow upon a path, you may forget how beautiful the world around you truly is. There is magic in getting lost. There is healing in places you would never expect to find it. Where first they arrived and felt trapped and afraid by the forest, shortly after, they found this place like a home, all because they allowed themselves to take things a little slower. I heard word from a little birdie that shortly after escaping the forest, the pair of them were married. And I suppose that's the end of that story. It's the first one that I tell a lot of visitors who spend time in my forest, as, well, it can be a problem when people come with ideas about where to go and how far they want to run. Truly, I don't think there could be a safer place on this earth. Every animal here has enough food to eat for decades, and yet they never eat more than they deserve, nor more than they need. Have I ever been in love? It's a wonderful question. I think I have. There are many who pass through here. Some of them I find quite beautiful. Although I am destined never to leave this forest, and I would have it no other way. Should one come to fall in love with me, they should have to stay here with me. I don't suppose anyone with much of a life outside would want for that, but you never know. Lonely? No. Ever since I was born here, I have never once been lonely. I speak in the common tongue with outsiders, but I also speak with the animals here. I'm a friend to them, and I'm a friend to the trees too. They're all that I desire. They're all that I need for company. Truly, I feel as though I would die sooner if I lived without this forest. The crunch of the dirt beneath my feet, the softness of the wind passing through the leaves, the gentle chirp of little birds. They're all I need to be happy. And you should know that I feel no sense of haste in finding love either. I am a very, very, very old creature. That ought to be a fun game. Tell me, how old do you think I am? Rough estimate. If you can guess close enough, I'll tell you another story. In fact, I think I'll tell you the story of one who I did fall in love with. Not quite 400, a little more. I'll give you a few more guesses. 2000. Still a little higher. I must say, I can see why your companion enjoys your company so much. Your face is aflutter with confusion and desperation to guess my age, and it is very interesting for me. You have a very beautiful youthfulness to you. I hope you don't let that go. The truth is, I don't know how old I am. Must be quite old. I can remember there being a castle in the centre of this forest once, and I was there when it was built, and I was there when it was knocked down as well, and now it's been reclaimed by the trees and the vines. So all right, I've had my fun. I'll tell you the story of my love. You've earned it, I think. A long while ago, I was quite a lot younger. I mentioned seeing a castle built and then watching it fall. Well, this was a good 2 to 3 castles ago. It was a long, long time ago. Long before your kingdom rose, and long before your friend and you were born. Long, long, long time before your parents, or even your grandparents were born. I think compared to how I am now, I might have even felt quite young. I was sat upon the branches of a tree, and I was waiting, having a conversation with a bird. When the bird was telling me about all sorts of things from outside the forest. The bird was telling me about the efforts of kingdoms nearby and the plight of the people. My heart wept, but I knew that if I protected this forest, that perhaps, before long, the resources here would grow to help the poor and to help the hungry to survive a little longer. I tend to my corner of the world, and the world shall tend to its. But as I was speaking with the bird, I noticed beneath me a human woman walking through the forest. Gently I climbed down from the tree and I introduced myself. She seemed afraid at first. She had never seen a horned man like myself before. But I apologized and I asked her to hear me out. I said that the forest was a safe place and that I would be here to guide her if she needed it. At first, she seemed closed off and quite startled, which perhaps that was due to my clumsiness at my young age, so I allowed her to walk on her own, and I did not follow her. However, the creatures of this forest, they speak to each other. They speak to each other with a quickness, and wherever she went, whether I was listening for it or not, I would always hear stories about her wandering from place to place. Now, she might have been a little intimidated by me, but that was not the case for the animals of this forest. I believe in a clearing nearby there was a lion, and I heard from the lion later that a woman had passed through, and when the woman passed through, she spoke with the lion. She ran her hand through his mane. She kissed him upon his forehead, and the lion introduced her to his family, to his pride. She spent the entire day with the lions. She helped them eat. They sampled some of her food, and she sampled some of theirs. And she became their friends. And then, the next day, I heard from a family of wild boar. The very same story. She had found them, befriended them, and shortly after, they had become friends. I found something enchanting about her, and I must admit, The fact that she had made friends with and spoken with everyone else in this forest but me. Well, I might be old and beyond jealousy now, but at that age, I was jealous, deeply jealous. And so I began following her, and I attempted to speak with her again. And the next time that she spoke to me, she did so with a smile. She apologized, and she said, "Oh, guardian of this forest, I didn't mean to speak with you with rudeness. I've never seen someone like you before, and, well, I didn't know how to go about making friends with one like you. But this forest is soft. This forest is safe, and I feel as though now I would like to make your acquaintance." And so we did. I invited her to walk with me, and when we did, we wandered the forest for a time that I cannot describe to you. It was a very, very long time spent together. We wandered and wandered for days and days, eating fruits from trees, picking vegetables, making friends with animals left and right. And before long, we had fallen in love. I must admit, I fell in love with her long before she fell in love with me. I found the way that she spoke with the animals even more gentle and even more reciprocable than mine. I felt as though I was callous at the time. And, well, she was gentle. And so for years, we wandered together. And before long, she decided, "Do you know, I think I should like to stay here." And so she did. Not far from here, there is a glade, and in that glade is a colossal tree. Within that tree there are steps, stairs, sofas, beds, paintings. And that is my home. And she and I lived there for years and years. We were never able to have children together, but we lived with one another for a long time. We walked through the forest every day. We were friends with all of the creatures of the forest. We were never short of food. We never bickered. We never argued. But of course, as all good things do, eventually, being mortal, I watched her grow old, and in my bed, I held her hand as she departed from this world for the next. Now, when I was that young, well, old by your standards, but young for mine, I was heartbroken. And I never lashed out, but I did stay in my treehouse home for a long while. A long, long, long while. But then, I simply kept living, and I remembered that I had a purpose. My purpose is to guide the forest. And so, guide the forest I must. I wandered out of my house, apologized for my absence, and I continued about my life. That must have been 8,000 years ago, at least. And I think of her every day. But I don't do so with sadness. At the time, I had felt as though this is something I would never heal from. I felt as though my love had been taken from me too soon, in spite of how long we were together. But then as I aged, I came to a conclusion, and I'd like to share it with you. I believe that love is eternal, in a sense. When we love, it binds us not just to a person's body, but to their soul as well. One day, I know that perhaps not for a long, long, long time, but one day I too shall die, and when I do, I shall finally get to see her again. For having loved her, even for a short while, in the grand scheme of the world, that, in and of itself, was beautiful. And I live after that love with not an ounce of regret in my soul. I live and I live and I live fiercely and long and with kindness. Because truthfully, even though she is no longer with me, she left me with a lesson. And the lesson is to remember that no matter what we gain and what we lose, we are always growing. We are always achieving new things, finding new people to love, finding new skills to practice, new hobbies to have fun with. And even if we lose something, we're not the people we are once we do. Once we've changed, we've grown. And I too, like each tree of this forest, have grown 1,000 times, even more so because of her. And how can you say that that is sad? I truly don't think so. And so I wander this forest, knowing one day I shall see her again, with no doubt in my mind that should someone else come to my forest, asking to see me, or perhaps to fall in love with me, I would only ever say no. My heart is for someone else. And should 8,000 years more pass, I'll always remember her. Oh, my poor sweet thing, why are you crying? Hey. Allow me to dry your tears. This is my story. And I am very happy to have known her. So, I've told you of my love. Why don't you tell me of yours? Allow me to think of a distraction for you. Let me think of another story to tell you. Here's one. Now this is the story of a family. And this family came here with ill intentions. This family came here because they were hungry. And while there are many fruits that grow upon the trees, and many vegetables that grow within the ground, this family were intent on eating meat. This family were hunters, and they came with bows and guns. I dared not interrupt, as I was not ready to die. The path of nature is the path of nature, and I am not one to interrupt it, and so I sat and I watched. They wandered through the forest, and they saw a great bear. And the family decided, we'll hunt that bear. He is our mark. And so they began wandering through the forest, tracking the bear. Upon tiptoes they walked, careful never to make a sound, wandering and wandering, and waiting for their moment. One night after they camped and slept, they noticed that the bear had gone away. They tracked it, using the bear's footprints, and eventually they found themselves at a marsh. Now within the marsh there was... It stretched farther than the eye could see, to the left and right, and without any ways of climbing over it through the trees, or the trees were too thin. And so they decided, well, we'll have to go through it. And so they trudged and trudged through the marsh, their feet digging into the mud, the water lapping against their trousers, their clothes becoming wet and sodden with muck and seaweed. And eventually they made it to the other side, and they found more of the bear's tracks. They hunted through the tracks, searching for the bear, and eventually they came across a thicket, thorns, branches, and plants. The bear's tracks simply stopped at the start of it, and they had to imagine that the bear was on the other side of it. It was too tall to climb over, and the ground was too firm to dig beneath it, too wide for them to go around, and if they went around perhaps they would lose the bear and he would run too far away. And so, with machetes and hatchets, they carved a path through the thicket. Flies hit their face. Insects gnawed upon them. Thorns scraped at their skin. But eventually, they clawed their way out the other side. And then, long after, they refound the bear's tracks, and they continued hunting the bear. They walked and walked and walked, and eventually they found a lake, a wide lake, and they could see the bear clearly on the other side. But the bear was already running, and the way in the lake was too wide for them to go around, and so yet again they had to go through it. They leapt in to the water, and they swam and swam and swam, desperate to find the bear. They were hungry, hadn't eaten for days, and eventually they clawed their way out and found their way upon the other side. They saw the bear's tracks leading into the woods, and they knew their mark was close. They followed the bear tracks, and eventually they found a cave, and within the cave they walked... excuse me. They walked within the cave, You must ignore me. It must have been some drink that I had shortly before you awoke. It's important for forest guardians to drink as well. No matter how old I get, I'll always be caught up with human vices. But anyway, back to the story. They had found the bear's cave. And within they walked. Their footsteps echoed upon the walls. Push, 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 push. And they heard, within the cave, a roaring. The bear knew they were on their way, and they walked, rifles raised, ready to take the bear's life and to finally eat. When suddenly, the bear roared. Rah! And the family began to panic. The family weren't sure what to do. And the man at the head of the family, the father of the family, raised his rifle, cocked it back, and this was an old rifle, mind you, this took place a long time ago, fired the rifle, and he missed. Now, rifles back then took a long time to reload, and they realized that they weren't going to be able to kill the bear. And the bear roared, ah, and the bear began chasing them out of the cave, and suddenly they turned around and realized that they needed to leave. They ran out of the forest, and they saw the lake again. They couldn't go around it, they couldn't jump over it, and they couldn't dig under it, so they had to go through it. And upon the other side they came back to the thicket, found the bear's tracks, and got back to the thicket, and they realized again they couldn't go over it, they couldn't go under it, and they couldn't go around it, so they had to go through it. And through they went, and ran through the thicket, bugs and thorns scratching their face, found the bear's tracks again, and then they saw the marsh, and it was too big to go around. They couldn't go over it, and they couldn't go under it, and so they had to go through it. And they squelched and squelched with their boots through the marsh, and eventually they reached the other side, and they escaped the forest. So at the end of the day, no one died, which I think is a nice ending. And also, the family had, in a way, grown together. They had less so been able to hunt a bear, and had more gone on a long, albeit stressful, family vacation. So I see it as a nice story. The gunshot might have scared the bear, but I'm sure the bear scared them even more. I suppose the reason I wanted to tell you that story is that the family never really did anything wrong. They wanted to do something wrong. They intended to, but in the end they were stopped. I want to ask you, is the family wrong for having ill intentions? Or are they good for having not been able to execute those ill intentions? Did they learn from the experience? Did they grow? Or would they walk to another forest and find another bear to hunt? It's stories like these where you need to ask yourself, who is right? Who is wrong? Who learned? Who didn't? It's never quite as simple as it sounds. So what I'd like you to remember is that in your own life, you are only ever going about your business and doing things that you wish to do and that you feel are right and justified. So in that way, how can you be guilty when your present moment is as happy as it is? Just something to think about, I imagine. You're reminding me of another story. Now, this one is about a group of friends. A group of boys. I think there were about 4 or 5 of them, and they wandered into this forest. They were young, no older than 13 or 14, and they were having fun together. And they wandered through this forest, joking and pranking one another, throwing little rocks at their heads and climbing trees, swinging off of the branches. The animals loved them. They brought a great happiness and warmth to this forest. Their laughter and their tears, it made this place loud with life. And so, the animals listened, and they watched, and they smiled. And one day, the boys decided, let's stay here for a bit. We like it here. Our parents can't tell us what to do. No bedtime. We can wake up late. We can go to bed late. Eat all the sweets we want. This is the life. And so, they stayed. They found a glade and they tried to build a little tree house. And the first one fell down. They weren't very good at building. They tried to build another one, and that also fell down. So I think in the end they decided that they weren't very good at building a tree house, and they built a tiny little hut out of sticks. And it wasn't amazing, but to them, it was enough. And they built a fire outside. They sat around it, roasted nuts and little vegetables together. They sat trading stories. And one night, the 5 of them decided, we shall have a contest. That night, they decided that they would each try to tell a scary story. And the one who told the scariest story would be the king of their group for one day, and would get to tell the others what to do. So they thought, well, that sounds like a fun contest. And so each of them set about trying to think of a story to tell, one to scare the socks off of their friends. Some of them went into the forest to think, maybe I can find inspiration around here. And sometimes they would speak with the animals, and the animals would tell them stories, but none of them could tell them anything much scary. Most of the stories that bears have to tell are about the time that they found a particularly large glob of honey inside of a tree. Most of the stories that birds have to tell are to do with particularly hard-to-crack acorns, and most of the stories that squirrels have to tell are about chasing mice. And so they didn't have much to go off there. So they really had to think of something unique. And they came back a day later, sat around the fire, and the first boy went to tell his story. The first boy said, he told a story. Do you know, I've quite forgotten the details. I believe it was something about goblins. Yeah, that was it. He went into his parents' basement one day while they were living in the human world. And living down there, he said, there was a goblin. And the goblin asked for food. And if he didn't bring the goblin food, he would get angry and angrier each day that went by. And then eventually he said, I forgot about the goblin. I went home, had my dinner with my mum, and then I went to bed. But that night, I heard a knocking at my door, and a little voice from outside, You forgot about me. And the goblin burst open the door, raised a knife above his head to kill the boy. And the boy said, and then he stabbed me. And all the friends held their hands over their mouths. Wait a minute, said the second boy. How come you're still alive if the goblin killed you? And the first boy stuttered. Why, you know. And then they laughed. Not a scary story. The second boy tried to tell his. Now this, guys, this is a real scary story. And he told a story about a time that he was living in a high tower with his family. Right in the middle of a castle. He lived in a tower with his family. And one day his parents had gone to the market, and they had said, Now son, don't you let anything cause problems around the house. Take care of it while we're away. He said, Okay, I will. And so the boy watched, sat in his parents' chair, and waited for them to return. I was very obedient, I was, he said to his friends, and they all nodded and said, Yeah, you are. And then, upon a little trellis, right next to a window, a pigeon landed. And it fell down the trellis inside the house. The boy looked at the bird and he panicked. What are you doing in here? And the pigeon looked at him, made its little pigeon noises. Whirr, whirr, it went. And the boy thought, well, you can't be here. And he started walking towards the pigeon and he said, Shoo, shoo. But the pigeon didn't move. And then the pigeon spoke. As pigeons, as you might know, don't often do. The pigeon said, This is my house now. I shall be here as long as I choose, and I shan't leave unless you've got the bravery to fight me. And the pigeon started leaving its droppings all over the floor. It flapped up to cupboards and began pecking at the food. It was a disaster. And the boy kept slowly walking towards the pigeon and flapping his arms. Get out, this is my parents' house. And the pigeon shrugged and continued to eat. And so, the boy kept flapping its arms, but every time he would get close, the pigeon would flap its wings, and it would scream, and the boy would get scared, and he would back away. Eventually the boy went over to the window with the trellis and looked down, and he saw his parents walking back, and he panicked. He looked over at the bird. He looked at all the droppings all over the floor, the food all over the place. And he panicked, and he ran up, grabbed the bird in both hands, and suddenly the bird stopped. It didn't coo, it didn't poo, it just froze. And he took it over to the window, and he let it go. And the boys asked, well, that's not scary. And he said, yeah, but when my parents came back, they just, they yelled at me. It was really nasty. And so they decided that one wasn't very scary either. the third boy piped up, and he said, "All right, I've got a real stinker for you now." He told a story about his grandmother. And he said, "I, one day, had to go for a trip. My parents were out of town, and I had to go and stay with my grandmother." And he said, "My grandmother's a very nice lady, but she really, really can't cook." And the boys were like, "Oh dear." And he said, "Yeah." And he went, and he stayed with his granny. His granny was lovely. But one day she said, "All right, time for dinner." And she went to the kitchen and set about making some food. The first thing she did was go into her recipe book. She had a little pot of rice, and she had some vegetables, and she had some chicken, and she thought she'd make a curry. Ooh, I love curry. First thing she did was begin by pouring the rice into a pot and starting it to boil. But as she was cooking it, chopping the vegetables quite roughly and all over the place, the boy watched in horror as she didn't know much of what else she was doing. She read the recipe all out of order. She had cooked the rice and it was all soft and full of water, and then she drained the water out using a little colander, and then once that was out of the way, she washed it again after it had already been cooked. And then, once that was out of the way, she threw her ingredients into the pan, began stirring them around, and just added way too much salt and not enough pepper at all. And the boy watched and watched and watched as his granny cooked and cooked and cooked and made something worse and worse and worse. And then he was handed an unrecognizable dish. And she said, "Go on then." And he was faced with a dilemma. I have to eat it, or else I'll make my granny sad. And the boy turned to his friends and he said, "So I stuck my fork into the curry. I picked it up and I ate it. And it was so bad that I died." And they said, "Oh, hang on a minute. You're alive right now." They said, "Oh, not very scary." And then it was the fourth boy's turn. Now he had a very clever idea. Very clever idea indeed. His plan was to add a little spice to his story, to add some special effects. And so he told a story about a time not too long ago that he had been wandering in these very woods. He told the story of how he went and found his story. He said that after he had broken off from the other boys, he wandered into the forest and he met a butterfly. And he asked the butterfly, he said, "Do you have a story for me? Has anything scary happened here?" And the butterfly said, "Well, yes, lots of scary things happen here." And so he said, "All right, show me what there is." And the butterfly said, "Follow me." And he walked after him, and they wandered into the forest for a number of hours. And shortly after, they came to a cave. They walked into the cave, boy was surrounded by colours, visions of somewhere far, far away, and the butterfly craned its neck, landed on the ground, and transformed into a tall, strong man. The strong man in the colourful cave knelt down to speak with the boy. He said, "Why have you brought me here? Why have you come here?" And he said, "I don't know. I just wanted to hear a scary story I could tell my friends." He said, "Well, you've become too far. You've wandered too deep, and now I can't possibly let you go." And so the boy was chained in the cave. And the man turned back into a butterfly and flew back towards the camp. And he waited. Later that day, the boy found a way of pulling his arms out of the chains, and he ran back to the camp, at which point it was already dark, and the first boy had just begun telling his story. He sat down, and being respectful of his friends, patiently waited his turn. As he was telling the story, he said the same very thing that summoned the butterfly to begin with. He said, "Are there any scary stories to hear?" And suddenly, the fifth boy screamed, "Ah!" as the butterfly had landed on his shoulder. He got up and he screamed and he ran around the fire and he said, it's real, he's not making it up, it's real. Then the butterfly flew away. But before it left, it landed on the fourth boy's shoulder, the one who had found him first. It landed on his shoulder, and it whispered to him, and it said, "There are things in this world, my boy, that you'll never understand, and if you seek me out again, you and your friends will die." And then he flew away, never to be seen again. At this point, the fifth boy had fallen asleep. He'd fainted because he was so scared. And so the five boys decided that the fourth boy's story was the scariest. And so they crowned him king of the forest for one day and one day only. Myself and the animals had been watching keenly. And do you want to know something? That butterfly, that was me. I enjoyed their imagination, and I fancied having a little bit of fun with them. And so, by my intervention, my rare intervention, I had managed to save their evening from becoming very boring. And the next day they all got quite spooked by staying in the forest, and they went home to their parents. Doesn't have much of an ending, but I should hope it was a nice distraction for you.